October the 7th, 2023, Hamas launched one of the most brutal attacks against Israel since the country's founding. Militants on paragliders threw themselves from atop buildings in the Gaza Strip, soaring over the border wall, while many more crawled through tunnels burrowed below. Once on the other side, they began indiscriminately attacking Israeli citizens, culminating with the slaughter at the Nova Music Festival. When the dust had settled, a total of 1,189 Israelis had been killed. It was one of the most brutal acts of terror against a Jewish population since the Holocaust. This attack, however, wasn't the first of its kind. It was the latest outburst in a strike-for-strike conflict that has been raging on in this region for almost a century. In this two-part series, I want to take a look first at the history that led us to this point, and second at what we can do from here to end the violence. Now, this is an incredibly emotive topic with some very strong feelings on both sides, and the debate can very quickly become toxic. So I just want to lay out a few of my positions before we dive in. Hamas are undoubtedly terrorists and need to be treated as such. It is worth acknowledging, however, that their existence didn't just come out of a vacuum. The conditions that the people of Gaza have been left in, stateless and living under blockade, creates an ideal breeding ground for terrorism. The Palestinian people have the right to live in dignity and autonomy, and the behaviour of Hamas doesn't represent all Palestinians, just as the behaviour of the Israeli government doesn't represent all Israelis. And in regards to Israel, Israel does have the right to defend itself from external threats, of which it has experienced a lot during its short history. But this does not justify the manner in which they have been waging this war or their continuing actions towards the Palestinians. A recent UN report concluded that nearly 70% of those killed in the conflict have been women and children, and in total roughly 46,000 people have been killed. Movements like Hamas can't be bombed out of existence. Every Palestinian who has lost a family member in this current conflict will go on to form the next generation of fighters. It's only by moving through a peace process that Hamas in its current form can be defeated. I've done my best here to give an accurate and unbiased summary of the history that led us here, but naturally I can't include every point in history. It's the nature of this endless cycle of violence that every violent act was preceded by another. Endlessly following down the chain of blame to determine who started this is impossible. Somewhere along the line, people will need to forgive the acts of evil people in order to reach a sustainable peace solution. There's wrongdoing on both sides, but criticism of Hamas doesn't mean that you don't support the people of Palestine, and criticism of the behaviour of the Israeli government doesn't make you anti-Semitic. If you want to disagree with some of the points I or others make in the comments, then please feel free to do so. But please remember that at the end of the day, most people just want to see an end to the violence. So anyway, with all that out of the way, where does this all begin? Well, we need to go back to the turn of the 19th century. During this time, there was a growing campaign in Europe known as Zionism. This movement believed that for Jews, having experienced centuries of persecution all over the world, the only way to protect themselves was to form a state of their own. Many locations were suggested for this state, including America, Argentina, and modern-day Kenya. In the end, the European Jews set their sights on their ancient homeland in the Middle East, which at the time was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. During this period, the number of Jewish migrants to the region was steadily increasing. Simultaneously, many of the locals in the region were developing the idea of being not just ethnic Arabs, but Palestinian, a distinct national identity. And then came World War I, at the end of which brought the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. In the aftermath, the region was divided up amongst the French and the British. The British land became known as the British Mandate for Palestine. Britain, hoping to win the support of Jewish people, in 1917 pledged the Balfour Declaration, which promised the establishment in Palestine of a natural home for the Jewish people. After this declaration, the Jewish population in Palestine continued to grow. The UK made some attempts to restrict this due to increasing resistance from the local population. In 1941, for the second time that century, the world descended into global conflict. At its conclusion, the world became aware of the horrors of the Holocaust that had been visited on the Jewish people, and amidst a global outpouring of sympathy, calls for a Jewish state grew. The UK passed the job to the newly formed United Nations to oversee the establishment of joint Jewish and Palestinian states within the British Mandate for Palestine. In 1947, a proposal was put forward to divide the land broadly equally along these lines.
The United Nations Special Committee had advocated separate Jewish and Arab states as the uneasy compromise.
The Jews accepted, and in 1948, the State of Israel was born. Very quickly after its formation, however, the surrounding Arab nations, who viewed its conception as just more Western colonialism, attacked the young nation, kicking off the year-long Arab-Israeli war. Israel won this war, and when the dust had settled, it had taken large areas of land designated by the UN for Palestine, while the Palestinian territory became part of both Egypt and Jordan. This period saw the mass expulsion of approximately 700,000 Palestinians from their homes and into the surrounding territory, in a period which came to be known as the Nakba, the Arabic word for catastrophe. The region existed in this state until 1967, when a second Israeli-Arab war, known as the Six-Day War, broke out. Again, Israel won this war and again expanded its territory, this time sweeping well beyond the initial 1947 proposal, taking Gaza and the Sinai from Egypt, the West Bank from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. In 1978, the Sinai was given back to Egypt as part of a peace deal, but the rest of the territory remained under Israeli control, leaving them responsible for governing a Palestinian population who had for decades been struggling for their own independence, first from the British and now from the Israelis. From this time continuing up until the present day, something else started happening which would irreversibly change the face of this conflict forever. Many Jewish settlers from within the land laid out in the 1967 borders started moving into the newly occupied territory to establish their ownership of the land. Today, the land controlled by Israel and Palestine looks like this, with a sprawling network of roads and settlements weaved between the limited areas of Palestinian control. These settlements, however, bring almost no wealth or development into the Palestinian territory, instead remaining strictly separated from the Palestinians. Israel operates like this today, as a first world country built on top of and around a third world one. There are many visual examples of this, but perhaps the most poignant one is of Road 4370, or as it is often referred to, Apartheid Road. It has two lanes, one for those with Israeli papers and one for those with Palestinian papers, divided by a thick concrete wall. In response to the increasing encroachment into their land, between 1987 to 1993, violence broke out in what became known as the First Intifada, the Arabic word for uprising. During this time, Hamas was formed, believing that the prior resistance movements to Israel were too soft. In 1993, in an attempt to solve this violence, the Oslo Accords were signed. For a while, it looked like some concrete steps towards peace may be being taken. One of the provisions of the Accords was the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, which today has partial jurisdiction over some areas of the West Bank. But this hope was to be short-lived. In 2000, after a second failed peace negotiation, called the Second Camp David Summit, a second intifada broke out. This one was much, much worse, and raged on for a further 5 years. At its culmination in 2005, Israel pulled out of Gaza, walling off the region and placing it under a crushing blockade. This went to the extent of even calculating the exact amount of calories needed by the population and allowing in no more food than that predetermined number. This blockade and the miserable quality of life maintained within its walls acted as a pressure cooker for extremism, allowing Hamas to seize power and split from the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. On October 7th, this melting pot of hate and suffering exploded out in the vicious attack against Israel that we saw on that day. In response to this, Israel declared its intent to eradicate Hamas from the face of the earth and launched a brutal assault on Gaza. As of the time of writing, the current death toll stands at 46,000 dead, almost 70% of them civilians and children, and almost the entire 2 million person population having been displaced. With a cycle of violence like this that has been raging on for decades, it seems almost unthinkable that any peace solution could be found. So is this even possible? Well, there are a few ways that this could be achieved, which I'm going to be taking more of a look at in my next video. If you want to see that, then please do consider subscribing. Thank you.